Alex does these things by himself where he does cold opens, but I'm not going to do that today. And good evening, boys and girls, or good morning, or whenever you're listening to this podcast. And welcome to the Red, White, Claret, and Blue Show. I am your solo host, Chris Condit, and here are the things we know to be true today. Daylight savings is the greatest example of government overreach since George III. You're welcome, Britons. Alex carries this podcast, and David Moyes and I have the same Saturday night routine. Shout out David Moyes. Follow the show on socials, linked here in the show notes. Now let's get into it. We are recapping the Aston Villa win against Brentford, and we don't have Alex's clever transitions today, so I apologize in advance. Let's talk about the lineup that Villa trotted out against the Bees. A surprise, or a couple of surprises. Emi Martinez out injured. He seems to get injured a lot before international breaks. Hopefully he's all good to go on Wednesday for Bruges. Marco Asensio not in the lineup either. Is there a concern there with his injury? There were some rumors that it was not just an injury, that he may have had a dust-up with another player. We're not going to comment on that because we are the home of the lukewarmest of lukewarm opinions, and so we are not going to speculate on rumors such as that, even though I am currently untethered by Alex, who is normally the anchor and guiding light of this podcast and our lukewarm takes, whereas I tend to run a little bit hotter. But so Asensio out, Emi out. Concerning, I think, when we saw that lineup. You don't like to see that. You don't. No offense to Robin Olsen, but no one wants to see him back there in net when Emi Martinez is the normal keeper. But fair play to Olsen, and we'll get more into it, but he played very well. With Asensio out, I think, or at least with Asensio not as an option, I think you can make the case that there were some struggles in the midfield. Whether or not Asensio would have changed those struggles, I'm not sure, and I'm not ready to say. But I think that was the biggest struggle for Villa in the game throughout the entirety of the game was in the middle of the park. And that's normally an area that Unai Emery and Aston Villa like to dominate. So that was a concern going in, and it did play out that way with Asensio being out. But still, in the long run, spoiler alert, Villa come away with the win. So we'll take that where we can get it. Let's talk about some of the specifics. In the early going, Brentford get on the front foot and put Villa under it to start. It's consistent pressure. A lot of the game is being played in the Villa half of the pitch for the first 10 minutes. However, Brentford can't really get a shot on target too well, and Villa's back four do very well in scrambling quite a bit, to be honest with you. Because there were some moments in front of the goal mouth where you kind of jumped up and your heart leapt to your throat, but the back four actually did a nice job of keeping pressure off of Robin Olsen in those spots because most of those shots got deflected and blocked away. So credit the back four for that, especially Disasi. He just had a fantastic game, and we are going to talk about him quite a few times in this podcast, I can tell you right now. On the Aston Villa side, they had a couple of chances in the first half. JJ at the 11th minute had a great shot that was deflected away. I think that was probably going in if it doesn't get deflected. So credit Brentford there. And I really like to see JJ driving the ball there and being confident with the ball in front of goal and taking not a super long range shot, but a shot from the edge of the area that was curling, like I said, looked to me like it was curling in, and it would have been a struggle for the keeper to get to it. But other than that, there was a chance from Tyrone Mings on a corner that he couldn't slot home. Other than that, though, there wasn't a whole lot in the first half for me. It seemed to me that a lot of the play was both teams trying to do the same thing. I mean, they set up very similarly in their approach, and each team seemed to be willing to sit back and try to counter the counter. And we've seen that more than once this season from Aston Villa. I was a little surprised by it from Brentford, but they've been in such poor form at home lately that I guess in the end, maybe it's not wholly surprising. I think that with Aston Villa, I think that Unai Emery wanted to set up safely along the back because he didn't want Robin Olsen to face the kind of threats that that Emi Martinez is subjected to on a fairly regular basis as he's out there. So that was one of the things that I took away from the first half. But by and large, I thought that you felt a little lucky that Villa were level, but they did have a couple of looks at or a couple of bites at the apple anyway. But all in all, first half for me, not a lot in it. So let's get to the second, and boy, did Aston Villa start with a bang. 48-minute. That's the Ollie Watkins we love to see. Should the shot have been saved? Probably. But what I watched was Ollie Watkins coming from the left-hand side, confident on the ball, firing from inside the box, and putting the ball in the back of the net. Again, not the prettiest goal you're ever going to see, but that's the player we want. That's what we want to see, him putting the ball in front of net. And how many times have I said it? And Alex has even started saying it now. You shoot the ball on goal. You put the ball on goal, and good things can happen. Like I said, that goal or that shot probably should have been saved, but it wasn't. And Villa are 1-0 up. And we have to say two things. Ollie Watkins is now, I believe, 3 goals away from the all-time record, all-time goal scorer record from Gabby Agbonlahor. And boy, does he love a goal against Brentford, his former team. He scores against them constantly. Now, 2 minutes later, in the 50th minute, I think anyone who has listened to this podcast or knows me personally knows exactly what I'm going to say here. And I will say that I would say the exact same thing if this goal was scored the other way and it was Brentford having a goal wiped out instead of Aston Villa. We're in the business now again of legislating toenails, and I hate it. I hate it. No one for 150 years thinks that's offside. I mean, you might get I think some players raise their arm on the pitch, but players do that all the time. For 150 years of people playing soccer or football, that's a goal, and it stands, and nobody really thinks much of it, because what we're talking about there, the fractional amount that Ollie Watkins is ruled offside is so tiny. I mean, he is stride for stride with the defender. This to me is where you lose me on VAR. And I've said this consistently for the last, anybody that's listened or watched this podcast for the last 2 seasons knows that my position on this has not changed. That's a goal. That's a goal to me. It's 2-0 Villa. And if that goal had been wiped out for Brentford, I'd be saying the same thing. No advantage was gained by Ollie Watkins being potentially a toe ahead of his defender as he stride for stride with him. That's not the spirit of the offside rule. That's not affecting the game in a positive way. So I understand why the decision was made, because that's the way these decisions are made now. But that doesn't mean I have to like it. And I'm being deadly serious that if this goal had been scored by Brentford, I'd be saying the same thing, and I'd be saying that Villa were extremely fortunate to have that goal wiped out, because that is a goal. And I'm shaking the table that I've got my computer sitting on now, because I'm that passionate about this stupid system whereby we legislate fingers and toes instead of what is actually the spirit behind the rule, and did a player gain advantage by being behind the last defender. So there's my rant. I think anybody that listens expected it. That's a goal. Villa should be 2-0 up. And Brentford are fortunate that's the way we call goals in soccer now, how tight we call them. So from the 55th minute on, it's largely Brentford on attack and Villa defending, and sometimes defending in a scramble. Again, you have to point out that Disasi is the player of the game for me, the man of the match by a long way, by a mile. He made some great game-saving type tackles in the box and outside of the box as well. And I have to say, watching Robin Olsen, especially in the second half, because he did come under a lot more pressure in the second half, he played with a lot more confidence than I think we're used to seeing. He was coming off his line early. He was inappropriately, oftentimes, he was catching the ball in traffic. I think that you have to give Robin Olsen, who a lot of people, and to some extent, myself included, have kind of bagged on him in the past, but he played a really nice game and he kept a clean sheet, which is hard to come by this season. So really have to give credit to Olsen, but especially Disasi, I just thought was outstanding. And I'm going to say it, I think, a couple of times on this pod. Don't fall in love with a lone player, but boy, is it difficult not to fall in love with a lone player like that, huh? We'll skip ahead to the 63rd minute. There's a penalty shout where Matty Cash heads the ball away. Disasi and Sade get kind of tripped up, and even Sade didn't really make too much of a case for it. The fans did. Thomas Frank did. It's not a penalty for me, and I think that was the right call on the field. And I think that if it had gone, it was VAR, but if it had been called a penalty on the field, I think they may have looked at it at VAR and potentially wiped that one out, because there's just, the ball is rolling out of bounds, and no one's going to get to it. And Disasi and Sade just get their feet tangled up. Now, fast forward about 15 minutes to the 77th minute. It's again, same two players, Sade and Disasi. And that one is much closer to a penalty, where the ball gets beyond Disasi. Sade is chasing it down. They are close to shoulder. I'm not sure that they're 100% shoulder to shoulder. I think that's one where whatever gets called on the pitch is going to stay with VAR. And in this case, it was not given as a penalty. And VAR can't find significant evidence to overturn it because it was so close to being shoulder to shoulder. There is one other thing I want to mention. Ollie Watkins should have had a second goal in the second half. I forget when exactly it was, but he's 1v1 against the keeper, and he tries to get cute and chip it, and it's easily saved, where he just needs to hammer that ball home and score. And that is the one thing that seems to be haunting Watkins all season, is when he gets these moments where he can stop and think about what he's going to do, and he's not just reacting, he tends to overthink it, and in this case tries to loop the ball over the keeper, and it's easily saved. Should have been a second goal for him. Should have been, at that point, if we're counting the earlier penalty, 3-0 Villa, but still, even then, 2-0 Villa, and this thing is easily to bed, and you feel a lot less pressure, because don't forget, Brentford did hit the crossbar. I'm sorry, not the crossbar, but the post. Villa were certainly under pressure for the last, a good stretch, I should say, of the last 20 to 30 minutes of that game. So all in all, it's a good 1-0 win on the road against a team that has been in terrible form at home, but Villa have been in terrible form on the road. So it was sort of like the reverse of, the unstoppable force and the immovable object, just both of them trying to pull the other way. And Villa come out on top. It's a big win in the league because it catapults the Villains up the table back into the European places, at least for now. It keeps us afloat with where we want to be, because we do have major competitions in the FA Cup and the UEFA Champions League, but we still need to be concerned with league position, not just for our finishing place in terms of where we can secure, not necessarily will secure, but where we can secure a spot in Europe. But also don't forget that each place above the table is worth more money, roughly about £3 million. And when you are a club like Aston Villa, that you're trying to break into that sort of big six, quote unquote, you need every pound you can count. And I know people don't want to hear the financial aspect as much as I tend to harp on it, but the financial reality of this club is that every single coin through the coffer is important. And so every single league position that we can move up is important. And the higher we can finish in the table is not only important for a European run, a hopeful European run where we can stay in Europe, some sort of European competition, but also for the financial benefit of the club and the long-term health and ability to continue to grow where this club is going. So I want to stress that, because I know there's a lot of focus right now on the cup and on the Champions League, and there should be. But we cannot forget about the league because of the financial implications it bears. So I want to remind everybody of that. And so with that, I'll move to good points, bad points. Good points. We didn't concede from the first shot on target, or any shot for that matter, which we have to credit, again, the world's number 2, Robin Olsen, just like we always have said. He's the best backup keeper in the world. Oh, I couldn't even say it with a straight face. Another good point, Ollie Watkins played with a lot of confidence. You could see him trying to create in the box. He had that pass to Rodgers that was eventually wiped out. The goal was wiped out, but still goal involvement there, or what would have been goal involvement. He took a couple of nice turns. His hold-up play, I think, was largely very good. So I was impressed and happy with what I saw from Watkins. Disasi, again, don't fall in love with a lone player, but boy, oh boy, he was man of the match, like I said earlier, for me, by a mile and a half. Just what a fabulous game he had. Legitimately game-saving tackles on more than one occasion. And it's not his natural position to play as a right back. So all the credit in the world to him. And he has quickly become sort of like a jack of all trades for Unai Emery in the short time that he's been with the club. Bad points. There are a couple for me. And I don't love to talk about this, but Villa got dominated through the middle of the pitch. The midfield really struggled, particularly Leon Bailey. And I know he plays out wide, but he could not hold on to the ball. Morgan Rodgers couldn't pick a pass. Yuri Tielemans played relatively well. But he was about it. John McGinn was getting overwhelmed by the Brentford press early. It was a difficult watch, because that's an area of the pitch that Unai Emery wants to dominate. And you would think Villa are built to dominate, but that wasn't the case on Saturday. So a concern there that Villa couldn't get a foothold in the midfield, but for some great play from the back, it could have easily been 2 or 3 to Brentford. So that's the negative, and that's Alex probably creeping into this podcast right now from afar. The other thing, like I said, I mentioned it with the midfield, but Leon Bailey, he can't seem to string a couple of good games together, because he looked great earlier in the week, but then he looked absolutely terrible against Brentford. So I really want to see him get going. Alex and I have talked about it for 2 years now, or however long we've been doing this pod, that he's one of our favorite players. And when he's effective, he's one of the most effective players we have on the pitch in terms of what he can do and how he can create the way that Unai Emery wants to create, with width and by stretching the field in both vertical and horizontal fashion. So we need him to get right, especially if we're going to make a deep cup run and a Champions League run here. So that brings us to larger implication on the season. As I mentioned earlier, Villa now sits 7th, and that is pending the result of Newcastle versus West Ham on Monday, which is tomorrow. I mentioned that this is daylight savings day for everyone here in America, except for a couple of states. So recording this on a Sunday, West Ham, Newcastle Monday. If Newcastle win, they will jump ahead of Villa based on points. But back in European places with a break from the league now. The next league match is not until April 2nd. So Unai Emery has a perfect record in March. He's got no all wins, no losses, no draws. Shoe in for manager of the match, manager of the month, right? Easy peasy. The next match for Villa is Champions League, Club Brugge. 3-1 aggregate score. We all know this. I'm telling you stuff you already know, right? 3-1 ag at home at Villa Park with a chance to go to the round of 8, which is a crazy sentence to say considering where Aston Villa was just a few years ago. Friends, I want to walk you back for just a moment, and then I'll let you get out of here because it is just me and nobody wants to just hear me rant on for an hour. But I want to take you back to a few, 5-6 years ago. Aston Villa is in the championship. Here in America, right now, there's a decent amount of games in the championship being played that you can watch via Paramount Plus, and before that, ESPN Plus. Back when Villa were in the championship, there was a game every week or every couple of weeks. Otherwise, you guys all remember, we're trying to find streams on Reddit to watch Aston Villa bootlegs so that we can keep up with them in the championship. This week, we are up 3-1 at home with a chance to go to the round of 8 in the Champions League. I want everyone to appreciate the ascent that has occurred here because this doesn't happen, right? This doesn't happen unless you have special players, special owners, and a special manager. And we need to, as fans, appreciate what we have here right now, despite the fact that it's been an up and down season, and it has. But we are not that far removed from Jack Grealish getting punched in the head against Birmingham City, who are now sitting in League One, by the way. We're not that far removed from games in the championship, from not scoring away for a calendar year almost. Just remember where we are and where we've been and appreciate what we have right now, including the up and down season that we've had. Because this is not guaranteed, and it's certainly not easy to do. So I've said all along when Alex and I have been doing this podcast that I am generally more hot and cold, but upon reflection, I'm usually the more positive one. So with that, I'm going to tell you all to remain positive, stay strong, support the club, and on Wednesday, hopefully, we are talking about Aston Villa advancing to the round of 8 in the Champions League. Think about that, folks. Up the Villa, and good night.
Hi, Mom and Dad.